where the moon lights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number one fan.
Hey up and welcome back to Rate Scary. This is another bonus episode because yes, I have been to see another film at the cinema, and this time I have been to see The Monkey. So if you're new here, every time there is a theatrical horror release, I do a special bonus episode on it, digging into some of the detail, in addition to the weekly Monday podcast episodes that I do. So warning, there are going to be spoilers ahead for The Monkey. If you have not been to see it yet, because it has literally just released, please save this. Don't spoil it for yourself unless you really want to, and come back to it once you have watched The Monkey. Okay, so we're going to do what we normally do. I'm going to run through the story first, and then we will dig into some of the details as well. So the film opens and it is set in 1999, and we see a pilot who we know as P.T. Shelburne attempting to return and destroy a drum-playing toy monkey at an antique shop, but fails because there is a tragic accident that happens. And shortly afterwards he disappears. He leaves his wife Lois to raise their identical twin sons, Hal and Bill. We then cut to a few years later and the boys discover the monkey in a closet containing their father's belongings and its wind-up key. And later that evening, the monkey begins drumming when they're at dinner, triggering the accidental decapitation of their babysitter, Annie, while out eating at a teppanyaki restaurant. Now, we've seen up to this point that Bill likes to bully Hal, and this definitely intensifies. And it prompts Hal to turn the monkey's key again, hoping that it'll kill Bill. But instead, their mother Lois suffers a sudden aneurysm and dies in front of Bill. Overcome with guilt, Hal attempts to destroy the monkey. He uses a cleaver to chop its limbs off, before he and his brother move to Maine to live with their Aunt Ida and their Uncle Chip. However, the monkey mysteriously reappears at their new home, completely unscathed. Realizing its power, Bill, despite Hal's protests, tests it, and it results in Chip's gruesome death after he's trampled by a stampede during a hunting trip. Understanding at this point that the monkey cannot be destroyed, the brothers seal it in its box and throw it down a nearby well, hoping it will remain hidden forever. The film then cuts to 25 years later. Hal is estranged from his brother, and we also learn that he has a son, Petey, who he only sees once a year out of fear that his own misfortune will pass on to him. Hal learns that his ex-wife and her new husband, parenting author Ted Hammerman, plan to adopt Petey fully, effectively cutting Hal out of his son's life. During their stay at a motel, Hal lies to Petey about being an only child, while Petey grows increasingly frustrated with his father's apparent indifference. We then find out that Aunt Ida is killed at her home when the monkey, having escaped the well, has been triggered once again. At the subsequent estate sale of Aunt Ida's home, Ricky, the son of a local police officer, purchases the monkey, becomes attached to it, because it reminds him of his absent father. But he's got some sort of a deal, apparently, to send this to a strange man in town, which he does. We then see that Hal receives a call from Bill out of the blue, and Bill is insisting that Hal drives to Aunt Ida's house to settle her estate and locate the monkey. Hal realizes that the monkey has already been activated when a woman dives into the swimming pool of the motel he's staying in and is electrocuted and explodes into a million pieces. He travels to Aunt Ida's house with Petey, and Hal learns that a series of very bizarre, fatal accidents have occurred in town over the past week, following Aunt Ida's death, where Petey also discovers Bill's existence, so Hal isn't an only child like he said. Shortly after, the real estate agent is killed in front of Hal when a shotgun falls from a closet and discharges on its own. And Hal discovers that Bill now possesses the monkey, having hired Ricky to retrieve it from him. Bill, having long suspected that their mother's death was caused by Hal using the monkey, has spent years waiting for its return to seek revenge. He's also deduced that whoever turns the key is immune to its power but cannot control who it kills, having repeatedly attempted to kill Hal, only for the monkey to claim others instead. Bill demands that Hal bring Petey to him so that Petey can turn the key in his place, but Hal refuses. Ricky, disguised in his father's police uniform and armed with a gun, kidnaps Hal and Petey, forcing Petey to enter Bill's booby-trapped house to retrieve the monkey. He manages to evade Bill's traps and encounters his uncle for the very first time, who tricks him into turning the key, resulting in Ricky's death, not Hal's, by a swarm of wasps. Hal follows his son inside, where Bill, enraged, attempts to force the monkey to drum without turning the key. In retaliation, the monkey begins drumming uncontrollably, triggering widespread death and destruction throughout the town, while still sparing Hal. Amid the chaos, Hal and Bill reconcile over their shared grief for their mother, and they apologize to each other. But not before the monkey decides to decapitate Bill using one of his own booby traps. Hal and Petey then drive through town, accepting their fate as the monkey's owners to prevent the key from ever being turned again. And at an intersection, a pale, black-eyed man riding a pale horse passes by and acknowledges them. Hal, determined to reconnect with his son, suggests they go dancing, something he and Lois, his mother, had loved, and Petey accepts. And we close. So, if you're not familiar with the story, this is based on a Stephen King short, and it's been adapted for the screen by a writer, Nick Leppard. As a complete side note, he's also written Dangerous Animals, which is a film that's coming out later this year, and it's for the same director who created The Loved Ones, Sean Byrne. You can check out my latest horror news episode for a bit more detail on that one. But this has been directed by Osgood Perkins, Oz Perkins. My first experience of him was through last year, through Longlegs as a director, so I had really, really high hopes for The Monkey. It's definitely a completely different tone to that of his last film, and I think it shows really good range for him as a director, because if I'm honest, I was expecting something akin to Longlegs, but I would love to see him do something like this again, more of a horror comedy. I think I want to talk first of all about the cast, because we've got a few leads in there and then a whole bunch of supporting cast, which I'm not going to be able to get into because they are very quickly killed off. So I'm going to start off with Theo James, who plays both Hal and Bill Shelburne as an adult. I did not know who this guy was until this film. I was surprised to find out that he's actually British, because he has the most incredible voice. I thought he did a really great job of playing both of the twins as adults. I probably would have liked to have seen a slightly more unhinged Bill, because we have very limited screen time with that character, and I don't think it quite conveyed how much hurt and anguish had driven him to do what he had done. And then similarly, I don't think Hal was a particularly likable character. He's the one that we focus on as the emotional center of the story, and it's through his memories that we understand this haunting, lasting effect that his childhood has had on him. But I would have liked him to have been a bit more likable as a lead. I guess he's not meant to be. He's meant to be this person who is traumatized by what has happened to him in his childhood. He's estranged from his brother, he's estranged from his son, he's pushed everyone away, but I just would have liked to have felt more of a connect to him. We then have Christian Convery, who plays young Hal and Bill. I loved him. I almost wish that we had spent longer with them as children, because I feel like it felt a little bit rushed. Towards the end of the third act, we go from spending quite a lot of time establishing the relationship that Hal and Bill have together, to then them moving in with Ida and Chip and very quickly wrapping things up so that then we can move on to them being adults. I would quite happily watch an extended cut of this film if it meant that I got more screen time with Hal and Bill as kids. But it's a very minor thing. It didn't spoil the film for me in any way. And then the other person that I want to mention is Colin O'Brien, who is Hal's son, Petey. Considering he gets quite a bit of screen time in the second half of the film, I don't really have any strong feelings about him. I feel like he did a really good job, but He wasn't particularly memorable. Again, I didn't really have any sort of emotional connection to him. And I don't think the film would have played out massively differently if his character didn't exist. And I think that's down to the acting from Theo James. Because we didn't have that emotional connection to Hal as a father, it meant that I didn't really care about PT as a son. So overall, good acting. I need to think about who I potentially would have liked to have seen in those roles if it wasn't Theo James and Colin O'Brien. A minor thing, but we move. I want to touch on the themes that we see in this film because there are a few, and the most obvious one, I mean, the tagline for this film is "Everybody dies," and that's fucked up. So there's an obvious theme of life and death in this film. The monkey is even stored in a box that says "like life," which we can take to mean that life is cruel, it's without meaning or explanation, yet somehow curious and tempting. And we have reference throughout the film to the pale man on a pale horse. We hear this quote, "I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts, and behold, a pale horse." And we most prominently see it in the final scenes when he appears to Hal and Petey as they are leaving town. And this is a reference to the fourth and final horseman of the apocalypse, namely death. And the monkey is definitely a metaphor for the unfairness of life, because no matter how much you might wish ill harm on someone or wish that someone that you loved hadn't become ill or died, death comes to everyone at the time that is chosen for them and not for you. And we see this through Bill repeatedly turning the key of the monkey in an attempt to kill Hal, but he puts his traumatized needs before any sense of solidarity, completely destroying his community in the process. And I think that's a metaphor for how damaging unhealthy family bonds can be, not just for those in the family, but those around them too. Which I suppose leads me on to a second theme that I picked up on, which is that of familial disconnect. Because we have Hal and Bill, sons of a pilot, so wouldn't have been around very much. It does sound like he was an absent father. He then one day just left, as their mother recalls to them. And Hal repeats this behaviour in fear of being the same letdown to Petey as a father, but also because he doesn't wish to bestow this generational grief on his son. We see it through the kid who finds the monkey. His father was a police officer and he references that he was a piece of shit and he wasn't around. And there's clearly an undertone of tension with him and his mum and his brother. But it's the familial disconnect through Hal and Bill's relationship that is the backbone of the film. Their shared trauma, their broken heart at the loss of their mother has driven an even bigger wedge between them than what they had before. But we do see them finally try to fix things at the end of the film, which they do, but for a very short amount of time. And then the last thing that I picked up on was there's definitely a theme of fear. I think the film can definitely be interpreted as a reflection on how we deal with fear, but also guilt as well. Because we have Hal, who spends most of his life trying to escape the monkey, but only really finds peace when confronting it and his brother directly. Then we have Bill, who spends most of his life trying to control the monkey, which ultimately sees his demise. And in the final act, Hal states he's taking control of the monkey to protect him and his family. However, the story leaves the door open for the monkey's evil to persist. And that can be interpreted as a warning that we cannot always completely eradicate our fears, but we can learn to face them with courage. So I liked that there were a few different themes at play there, and I do have a plan to go and see the film again tomorrow because I want to see what else is in there, particularly around those themes, but if there's anything else that maybe I didn't pick up on the first time around. And the other thing that I want to mention is the kills. I am a big fan of the kills in this film. I think they are brutal, disgusting, shocking, untimely. This isn't Terrifier like shock value, vomit gore kind of stuff. And I think people are making a mistake by comparing this to Final Destination, because I think in Final Destination we get very, very creative kills that almost border on goofy and ridiculous, whereas these kills are almost a little bit more, they're practical, they're accidental. I can kind of see them happening. Like they are absolutely atrocious and devastating, particularly Aunt Ida's as she sets herself alight after getting fish hooks in her face and treating them with rubbing alcohol, and then runs outside and impales her head onto a yard sign. That I can see as a Final Destination kill, but an electrocuted pool, a shotgun going off, they're not Final Destination kills. They are pure accidents. So I can kind of see how some people would make some comparisons to Final Destination, but I don't think that's particularly fair. I didn't feel Final Destination while watching this film, because I think the kills were a great representation of some of the themes that I've mentioned, particularly around fear and trying to control death. And if I had to pick a favourite, I would probably say it's the swimming pool death, just because I had no idea that when this woman was going to dive into this electrocuted pool, that she was going to blow up when she hit the water. Because in my logical brain, maybe not so logical, I thought that she'd frazzle in the water, so like she'd stun in the water, but she went off like I don't know what, that she just exploded and my jaw swung open in the cinema. It had such a brilliant shock factor, no pun intended. But I love how quick paced the kills were as well, because I think they really played on that. Like, I thought the comedic timing was great in this film. I just had a really great time with it, and I think it's easy with horror films, particularly when you are a critic, when you review films, to go a bit too deep and read into them too much. And I think it'll be a shame for Osgood Perkins if people go into this, maybe like I did, expecting a Longlegs-esque film, when actually I think this is just pretty surface level, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. It'd be great to watch with friends. Like, it'd be great to introduce people who've never seen it to this film, just to see the look on their face with some of the kills. So in summary, I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd, only marking it down by a star down to some of the acting and how likable or not likable the characters were, and also due to some of that pacing that I mentioned regarding the first third. But like I said, I'm going to go watch it again tomorrow. I will report back if that score changes, if I like it more on rewatch, because sometimes that changes, or maybe if I like it less. But I'd love to know what you think in the comments if you have been to see The Monkey. But if you are new here, I'd love it if you could, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you are listening on a podcast player, please click follow and give me a rating on there. It definitely helps with the algorithm. It pushes me out to more people, because I am doing this solo and I'm still very new to it. And I love chatting to people in the comments as well as on my social media. So if you want to give me a follow, it's at Rate Scary on YouTube and Instagram, and also at Scary Zara Mary on TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, and also don't forget about Letterboxd. And on Monday next week, I have another episode that is coming out with my very, very good friend Celebro, as we delve into Bram Stoker's Dracula. And the week after, I'm going to be doing a ranking of Gothic horror films before I close the chapter on Gothic and move on to a new subgenre, torture. So for now, I'll see you with you then. I'll see you soon.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I'll be right back.
Game over. It's all for you.
Beware the moonlights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number one fan.